Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, Governor Dayton, Governor Carlson, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Franken, Dr. Johnson, Senator Cohen, Skip Humphrey, my longtime friend, and members of the Humphrey family. To all of you, first, thank you for giving me such a pretty day to come back to Minnesota and a crowd to stare at. I saw my friend Judge Alan Page and Diane out there. They used to jog with me when I was president, and I couldn't tell whether I was being protected or humiliated trying to keep up with them. I want to thank Fritz Mondale for many things, for being my friend for a long time, for being a fabulous ambassador to Japan. And I want to thank him for teaching me how to laugh in tough times. You may remember that 1980 was not such a hot year to be a Democrat. The Carter-Mondale ticket lost. I became the youngest former governor in American history. It was not a great year. And we had all these Cuban refugees that Castro had let loose, and they had all been deposited in my native state, where they proceeded to riot, much to my detriment and to Jimmy Carter's. In addition, we had the hottest summer in 50 years. And then, right before Vice President Mondale was scheduled to come to Arkansas to speak to the Democratic Convention to rescue us from all of our misery, a Titan missile silo exploded and a nuclear warhead popped off of the missile and landed in a cow pasture, giving my native state the only cow pasture on planet Earth with its very own nuclear warhead. So Fritz arrives in Arkansas, in the town where I grew up, to give this speech. And I said, you know, I was really grateful to you for sending me all those rioting refugees, and I didn't think I could be any more grateful until what is that? I once saw a state senator of mine get hit by the American flag, and he said, you know, I risked my life for that flag in World War II. I don't think I should be killed by it. Anyway, so Mondale arrives in the midst of all this tension, and I'm sitting there with him in a suite at the old Arlington Hotel, and he picks up the phone and calls the Secretary of Defense. We knew he was toast. We knew I was toast. We knew we were all marking time. And Fritz Mondale, in the midst of all that misery, said to Harold Brown, the Secretary of Defense, he said, Harold, I did ask you to get the people's minds off the Cuban refugee crisis, but I think this nuclear warhead was not what I had in mind. It said a lot about his character, as well as his sense of humor, and I never forgot it. I was a 26-year-old young man first time I met Hubert Humphrey, and he was barging across a hotel lobby to go to his speech during the 1972 campaign. And I barged in through all the staff members and shook his hand. And I told him I was from Arkansas, and I thanked him for that 1948 speech. And I thanked him for helping to engineer the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I thanked him for helping to change the course of America and to raise the level of common decency in the American South. All my life, I loved and admired Hubert Humphrey. He believed that public service was a noble endeavor. He believed that his adversaries need not be his enemies. He believed that with a happy heart and an open ear and an honest dialogue, a lot of conflicts could be resolved. And he lived his life to do it. When Al Franken said what Hubert Humphrey would be doing on some of these contentious political issues in Washington, I found no quarrel with it. But I think there's another set of issues which would concern him greatly. Hubert Humphrey believed that our founding fathers were serious when they pledged their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor to form a more perfect union. He did not think it was an accident that our national motto was a pluribus unum. Nor did he think it was surprising that we had never become truly one out of many, since our founders legitimized slavery in the Constitution, even as Thomas Jefferson was saying that he trembled to think that God was just in the face of his and others' ownership of slaves. In other words, he believed that the lifetime work of every American was to do what was possible and at hand to form a more perfect union. And now, in spite of all the economic difficulties of the moment, in spite of this big increase in the debt that the current financial crisis has caused as fewer people pay taxes and more people need unemployment and food stamps. Last week, if you wanted to, you could borrow $1 million for a year for $15,000 in interest. In other words, less than inflation, because people still believe that we are on that mission to form a more perfect union. Therefore, I think it would disturb him when a member of the United States House of Representatives said that between 78 and 81 of his colleagues were members of the Communist Party. That actually happened a couple of weeks ago. And I thought to myself, I didn't think there were 80 communists left in the Western Hemisphere outside Cuba. So I thought it was kind of interesting. I wanted to know who the rascals were. And I'm still trying to find out. I think he would have been proud of John McCain for sticking up for the Secretary of State's aide, Huma Abedin, when she was attacked for being a Muslim. I think all these attempts to restrict the franchise by imposing new requirements on voting would bother him. You know, in Pennsylvania last week, they had litigation over the Pennsylvania restrictions, and it was a difficult time for those who were pushing them, because the Attorney General of Pennsylvania stipulated that he could not produce one piece of evidence of voter fraud in Pennsylvania, and that if the court decided to strike down the voter requirements, he did not believe there would be an increase in voter fraud. And at the same time, the chief sponsor of the legislation said, he said, oh, I passed this bill to determine the outcome of the election in Pennsylvania. In Texas, where the lawsuit over their restrictions is being heard in Washington because of a past history of discrimination, when it was pointed out that poor Hispanic voters who live in rural areas and have low incomes would have to travel an average of 100 miles and spend $22 to become legally registered voters under these new requirements. The Attorney General said, heck, it's Texas. We're a big state. People, they get used to driving a long way. We're not talking about J.R. Ewing, folks. We're talking about minimum wage workers a long way from home for whom $22 is still a lot of money. What I want to say is, because of what Hubert Humphrey did, with all the problems we've got, we are well positioned for the 21st century economically for things that aren't directly related to economics. Your country is younger than Europe, younger than Japan, and in 20 years will be younger than China, because Minnesota has grown more diverse. Because we have people from all over the world, from different religions and different races. And youth, having lost it, I can tell you this, youth matters to the economic future of a nation. It determines the range of possibilities. It doesn't guarantee us anything. We still have to be smart and innovate and invest in the right things, do something about our long-term debt. We got to deal with all that. But what got us to the point of continuing possibility in the 21st century is the commitment to a more perfect union, to opening the doors of freedom and opportunity, to embracing our diversity instead of being afraid of it. And I always loved the Humphrey quote from late in his life, that the moral test of government is how it treats those in the dawn of life, those in the twilight of life, those in the shadows of life. But that means that those things are necessary because we are trying to build a country of one out of many, because we are committed to a more perfect union, because we believe that a country of shared opportunities and shared responsibilities and a shared sense of community will produce greater prosperity and be a greater force for peace and security and decency and freedom all around the world. For as long as I live, I will be grateful for Hubert Humphrey's life. You have no idea how many times, I was only 2 years old when Hubert Humphrey gave that speech in 1948 that Dr. Johnson talked about. You have no idea how many times I watched a tape of that speech when I was a boy growing up in Arkansas, because I knew that that led directly to the passage of the Civil Rights Act, to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, to the passage of the Open Housing Act, and eventually to the election of Barack Obama as President of the United States. And I knew that it made possible for Keith Ellison to go to Congress. I knew that it made possible for people of all different kinds to stand up and be counted and be judged, in the words of Dr. King, not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character and by their abilities and by their vision and by their ideas. I want to live in a country again where somebody in the Senate like Hubert Humphrey can sit down and cut a deal. That's supposed to be bad language. I think that's a noble thing. Can cut a deal with a man like Everett Dirksen and bring a civil rights bill to the floor that will pass with over 70 votes that are bipartisan, when actually, because of the lingering presence of Southern Democrats, a slightly higher percentage of Republicans than Democrats voted for it in the United States Senate. I want that kind of America again, where we can do things together across party lines because we believe we can build a more perfect union. And if it comes again, you remember what Senator Klobuchar said. It will not come from people who look like they spent all morning sucking lemons. It will not come from people who say the sky is falling. It will come from happy warriors. It will come from people who believe in the possibilities that lurk inside all of us. It will come from people that understand that every one of us, every single day, wakes up in the morning with a soul in the scales. And there's a few weights on the dark side and a few weights on the light side. And we have to decide every day of our lives whether the scales will tip light or dark, hope or fear, unity or division. Hubert Humphrey had a lot of things happen to him that could have weighed down the wrong side of those scales. He made a deliberate decision every day of his life to tilt the scales in the right direction. And so must we. Thank you very much.